I'm here to document some of the history of my 73 Basin Street Blue Duster that I like to call the Dick Landy Industries Duster. The Duster first appeared in the April of 1990 Hot Rod Magazine article titled A Plus Performance, where stock and super stock racer Paul Rossi tuned the 331 horsepower 318 from Aero Racing to run a sub 13 second quarter mile with 390 gears and a A999 transmission. Then the car moved over to Hot Rod Magazine October of 1992 Crate Engine Performance Shootout, where legendary racers Dick Landy and his son Robert Landy installed a 360 Super Commando roller cam crate engine into the Duster, where, with Robert Landy piloting the Duster, soundly trounced the 350 Camaro and the 351 Windsor Mustang, running a 12.587 quarter mile at 106.803 mile an hour. The Camaro and Mustang camps were stunned by the performance of the Landy-tuned Duster. And after that, Robert and Dick used the car to do fun racing at their local track. While the Duster was sitting outside at the Dick Landy Industries shop, it was noticed by a customer who inquired about purchasing the car so they could get out and do some racing. Gary Hickman and his son, Tony, who had purchased the car, eventually decided they wanted to go faster. So they took the engine back to Dick Landy, who spiced it up in the October 2004 issue of Hot Rod, where they made over 500 horsepower. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, due to some incorrect specifications on the solid height of the valve springs, about a third of a retainer broke and ended up down inside of the engine. Not knowing the extent of the damage and kind of disappointed with the engine breaking so soon, Gary ends up putting the car in the enclosed trailer from 2007 to 2013, where he brings the car out to display it non-running at the 2013 Mopars at the Strip. A few months later, the Duster is listed on Racing Junk, and in September of 2013, I end up purchasing it and the enclosed trailer. Oddly enough, my brother and I were talking about the Duster just before it was listed in Racing Junk. Literally, as I was purchasing the car, it appeared in the December 2013 issue of Mopar Action. Unable to find a transporter who would move a car inside of an enclosed trailer, my wife and I jumped in the truck and drove the 2,000 miles out to Las Vegas, picked up the Duster, turned around, and headed back toward Indiana, where on the same day that we arrived, we pulled the engine and tore it down in preparation to fix the damage and get to the track before the end of October. Fortunately, there was no real damage, and with a set of new valve springs, retainers, keepers, a set of ARP head studs, and some new 1008 Felpro head gaskets, we were able to get the engine back together in anticipation of the fire-up. We even had the Hedman Hustler headers black ceramic coated. It's a really good thing I took pictures, so I knew how all of this went back together. Once back in the car, there was only one thing to do, was this 13 1/4 to 1 compression solid roller cam engine. So in less than 30 days, we had the engine out, repaired, back in the car, and made it to the track. Unfortunately, high winds kept us from running quarter mile, so we were stuck running the 8th, where we ran a 714 at nearly a 100 mile an hour. Then we took the car into the dyno, where we tuned it to 360 rear wheel horsepower. 2 years of ownership, I really wanted to step up the game. So after buying a junk X block that had cracks in the mains, I ended up pulling out the engine in preparation from the next venture, a turbocharged 318 Magnum. It was sad to see the 360 solid roller cam go and the 456 gear, but I really wanted to drive the car more on the street. Going from carbureted big blocks to small block fuel injected turbocharged engines is a big jump for me. So after getting it running on the fuel injection, I ended up starting to fit the turbo system. Please notice the air conditioning unit. Since I plan to street drive in this, air conditioning is a must for me. My wife really needs it. I looked at a couple different places to put the turbo before settling on the passenger front side of the engine compartment. I used Magnum manifolds flipped face forward and routed from them to the T4 turbo flange. Since the turbo was mounted where the tensioner normally mounts, I ended up having to shorten the tensioner and move it over to the driver's side head, making sure that there is enough belt wrap so that none of the accessories slip. Then I worked on the downpipe, going from a 3.5-inch pipe out of the turbo down to a 3-inch pipe, while making sure that there was clearance for the blower motor. And then I ran the cold side underneath the radiator hose, which I will regret later, before moving to the rear of the car to undo all of the modifications for the fuel cell in the spare tire well, which required removing the piece they had put in for the fuel cell and then fabricating not only fuel tank hold downs, but the trunk floor itself. After test fitting the tank and welding everything in, it was time to move on to the most exciting part of the entire build, the wiring. And boy, was it a mess. The previous owner had cut out the instrument cluster and put a painless system in right behind the dash bar, which made seeing the buttons impossible. After the removal of the painless system, I installed a very nice original wiring harness, and then proceeded to restore the original cluster and steering column, which required replacing the ignition switch, turn signal indicator, and steering wheel lock, before I was able to go after that first fire up. After that first fire up and working through some tuning problems, I realized how much I hated the cold side going underneath the radiator hose. So I pulled it off for a rework, making sure that it would still clear the hood, and I also took the opportunity to redo part of the hot side to make it more serviceable in the future. I also took the opportunity to install a large aluminum E-body radiator and a 12-inch electric fan. After 2 years of it starting on this endeavor, I finally made it to the track and was rewarded with a sub 13-second pass. Yes, tuning fuel injection sucks. Getting it back home, noticing there was a lot of blow-by, I did a compression test, and whoops, I must have broke something. Turns out I had hydrolocked the engine at one point and cracked 2 pistons. So I made a 12.8 pass on probably more like 6.5 cylinders. Engine number 1 bites the dust, so time for engine number 2. And since I was putting it in, I thought, what the heck, let's go ahead and put a little bit more cam in it, because more cam is always better. But just whammying a cam in isn't the only thing you have to do. You have to check for valve clearance. So put some clay in, solid roller lifter, and adjustable push rod, and checked it out. And I also went ahead and put my aluminum pulley set on that I've been saving for some odd reason, hoping to free up a little bit more horsepower. And lo and behold, look, an 1168 on 15 psi. But no good deed goes unpunished, and on 20 psi, we end up snapping off the output shaft inside the drive shaft. Whoops. Quick trip to A&A for another 999 output shaft, and we're back in business. I put that in and make another trip back to the drag strip. We're on 15 psi. We net our best time ever, an 1148 at a whopping 121.63 mile an hour. But that's not good enough, so we whack it with 20 psi and a net 1138 at 119. But look at that 8th mile, 100.5 mile an hour. At this point in time, we're making enough steam, we're just blowing clean through the J converter, and we're spinning about 7,100 RPMs, and the engine hardly changes pitch when shifting between the gears. So we end up going after a PTC torque converter. And while playing on the street, lo and behold, we snap off the input shaft. Man, I just can't catch a break. At this point, I'm completely done with stock shafts. So I pull the transmission out, take it over to Cope Racing Transmissions, have billet shafts put in, their billet valve body, dump valves, deep pan, the works. That way, the transmission is rated for 750 horsepower, and we shouldn't have any problems. With less than 2.5 days before Holly's first mow party, we get the trans back and get it in, just in time. While running an 1141 on only 12 psi, we experienced yet another engine failure. This has been a recurring problem, which originally I thought was maybe an oil pan had an engine failure. Thought maybe it was converter ballooning, but after we replaced the converter, yet another engine failure. Only to find out this whole time we've been using a 360 flex plate instead of a proper internally balanced 318 flex plate. After putting engine number 5 together, we head back to the track and are rewarded with an 11.567 at 116.8 mile an hour. Stay tuned for further updates. And if you have any information on the history of this car prior to 1990, please contact me.